We are in a series on Jesus, Raw and Unfiltered. We're looking at some of the really tough teaching that passed through Jesus' lips. There's perhaps a perception with some people that Jesus was all about love, and of course he is all about love, but also his teaching was and is incredibly challenging. And so the purpose of this series is to look at some of this teaching, and we're looking at the Sermon of the Mount. And tonight we're talking about relational conflict. Many of you here will have watched a program like EastEnders, Coronation Street, Holby City, Casualty. There's any number of programs out there like that. And I guess the thing that makes them really compelling watching, not for me, I'm afraid, because I don't really have time to watch TV, but for a lot of people, is it's full of argument. It's full of relationship breakdown. It's full of drama and strife. Now, some of it might be, a car crash, that kind of drama, but a lot of it actually is to do with relationship breakdown. That's why we see murders, including on what's that Radio 4 program that's absolutely and so it's all over the place, relationship breakdown. And I'm really conscious that it's the best way that Satan can bring around the destruction of community, whether that's in a family, whether that's in a church, is through relational breakdown, relational conflict. This is why when we see how to handle relational conflict on the TV, because the media has such an influence over us, we're picking up on how the script writers think that conflict is handled, and definitely not how Jesus would like us to handle conflict. So the way we handle conflict can be dysfunctional. The way we handle conflict is absolutely vital as followers of Jesus. And it's clearly really important to Jesus. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spent so much time in the Sermon of the Mount teaching us on how to handle conflict. It would be fair to say that, metaphorically speaking, if you were to lift up the shirt of any church leader, you will find wounds and scars. Probably any person in leadership. Most of my wounds and scars, they're nothing to do with having to raise £500,000 for a new roof. They are all to do with hurt and relationship breakdown with people in the church. So for me, how I handle relationship conflict is of paramount importance. There are people sitting here tonight with whom I have fallen out with for hopefully a very short period of time. I hope if that's you, you will reflect back on what went on and seen that it was handled in a biblical way. And I'm confident looking out now that it was handled well and relationships have been restored as a result. It is so important that we get this right. So we're going to look at Jesus' words, which deal with three basic scenarios. When you've done something wrong to someone else, when someone else has done something wrong to you, and thirdly, possibly of less importance, but still worth covering nonetheless, is if you just can't resist finding fault in people and judging people. So the first one we're going to look at is when you've done something wrong against someone else. Let's turn to page 917 in your Bibles. This is what Jesus had to say. It's chapter 5, verse 23 in Matthew. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother or sister. Then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Jesus says, leave your gift at the altar. That means stop. Stop what you're doing. Don't go any further. Leave your gift at the altar, so to speak. Turn round and speak to the person with whom you have a problem. Now, this is particularly important within a church context with if you're engaged, let's say, in public worship. So, for example, it would be spiritually completely wrong if I'd had a complete Barney with Danny today and we hadn't made up, we hadn't resolved matters, for us to be leading worship tonight. Same ditto for Tim. It would be unimaginable that we could do that without having stopped on our way to the altar, gone back and cleared the air and handled it properly. You shouldn't wait, okay? Because as soon as you have a relationship problem, Satan is straight in there waiting to make the maximum use of the hurt. It's like a wound that is opened. The longer you leave it, the more it festers and the harder it is to heal. So the second step is then to go to the person that you've upset. Now, I don't know about you, but that is most often the last person I want to go to. Okay, I'm okay about stopping, okay, but what I'd much rather do is go to someone else and say, oh, you never know what I said to Johnny today. Oh, I really shouldn't have said it. I just don't know what was it. You know, I mean, isn't that awful? Okay, so I'm talking to someone else about it. The other thing I can do is I can admit it to myself. Okay, I can just say, oh, crumbs, Will, you really messed up badly. You know, and then rationalize it a bit and just keep it to myself. Or I can just admit it to God. Of course, this is quite holy. It's very good to confess your sins. But it's a lot easier to confess to God, to admit to God that you've made a mistake, than it is to actually go back to the person that you've really messed it up with. But Jesus is clear. You go back to the person. Now, according to Scripture, after you have stopped what you're doing, after you've gone to the person, then you need to take a third step, which is to be reconciled with them. Now, reconciliation is apologizing for the wrong that you have done and seeking to make right what has gone wrong with a person you have offended. Repenting for how you have contributed to the relationship breakdown. Now, let me tell you what is most likely to happen at this stage. Even if you successfully take the first two steps, the temptation will be to mess this last one up, because this is the really powerful step. So what you'll do is you'll go to the person and just to admit to you, as I was preparing this bit of my talk, I had a relationship problem with a member of the staff team. And as I was speaking to this person who I had offended on the telephone, these words came to mind. So I've actually put this into practice, okay, in the last couple of days, and it worked, okay? But what I was tempted to do, what I might have done had I not actually been preparing this talk, was to say, I'm so sorry you were offended. I'm so sorry you misunderstood what I was talking about. I'm so sorry you felt hurt. Do you notice what I'm not actually saying there? I'm not actually saying I'm sorry for saying what I said. I'm doing a fantastic gold medal kind of blame-shifting routine. I'm so sorry you didn't understand what I was really saying. Doesn't matter whether they understood it or not. They've been deeply offended by something that I said. In other words, what you're doing, if you're not careful, is you're making it all about them and nothing about you and your own mistake and fallenness. It's not really about you. Now, of course, what needs saying, and this is what I said over the telephone to this person, is, I am really sorry. You know, I knew as I was talking, it was just I knew I was going to get in trouble for this. You know, they were the wrong words. I am sorry. Please forgive me. That's what you need to say. You're not going to try and explain it away, make excuses, shift the blame, and make the other person feel guilty for not having properly understood what you really meant. And it's tough. It's really tough. You know, it was like, say it. Yeah, I'm sorry. You know, it's tough, but it's powerful. It's powerful. And you can almost sense Satan, who is there, just ready to leap over the mess, leap over the argument, going, I'm off to the next victim to see if I can have better luck there. So that's when you offend someone else. Relatively straightforward, but still not that easy to do well. Now, what if someone does something against you? So this is what Jesus said about that. We're looking again at chapter 5, verse 21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Now here, what Jesus is saying is going way beyond what God had in mind with regards to relationships. It isn't just that we're not to murder. I mean, personally, I find that a particularly easy command to obey. But the next bit, not to get angry with a brother, whoa, that is really tough teaching. We aren't to hate. Hatred, you see, is corrosive. It's like an acid. It's just the same as a lack of forgiveness in your heart. It will eat away with you when you're angry with somebody and you don't want to forgive them. It just festers in your heart. And over the years, if you allow it to go on that long, and many people allow it to go on for almost a lifetime, until they end up just bitter and twisted and broken people. Now, we can get angry. Anger is a human emotion. God designed us with the ability to get angry. So anger in itself isn't necessarily wrong. There can be righteous anger. Do you remember when Jesus went into the temple and drove out the money changers? You know, he'd even made a whip to do it with. I mean, he was one seriously cross Lord and Messiah. Okay, that is righteous anger. But regardless of the type of anger, even if it is righteous anger, what you cannot do is allow it to lead to sin and evil. Okay? You know, you could have really righteous anger about child exploitation or child prostitution. You can be seriously angry. In fact, I hope you are seriously angry, because sometimes our anger is like a holy discontent, and it stirs up a desire within us to actually do something, to take a stand. But what it is never to make you do is to commit sin, is to commit murder, for example, is to commit hatred. You mustn't let anger lead to evil. In other words, even if it's righteous, justified anger, it is wrong to let it lead to hate or revenge. Which takes us to what he says next. So I'm going to verse 38 now. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. How often do you come across that? And I bet you most people who quote it have no idea where it comes from. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Well, if the last bit of teaching was tough, it doesn't get any tougher than this. We see it happening. We see our brothers and sisters practicing this as they are kneeling on a beach in Libya before the Islamic State execute them. It's so humbling. You see, what Jesus is saying here is when someone dishes out something to us, using the metaphor of serving a tennis ball, what we don't do is try and hit it straight back even harder to try and hit them with. We are to respond with love. It's very, very difficult indeed. You see, this passage really is about people trying to seek revenge on your own. Okay, it's not about saying it is wrong to go to court, for example, to fight for something that is right. It's nothing to do with that at all. It's about don't go and take revenge yourself on your own. Now, I don't know about you, I can imagine not hitting back, but what about loving back? That is really tough. But that is what Jesus is after here. Not to meet bad with bad, hurt with hurt, wrong with wrong, eye for eye, but to meet it in the Jesus way, with love. John Stott wrote that throughout the ordeal of his crucifixion, Jesus, with infinite dignity, self-control, and love, held his peace. Okay? He wasn't being a doormat on the cross, okay? But, Stott writes, he acted with the selfless love of a person who, when injured, refuses to satisfy himself by taking revenge, but studies instead the highest welfare of the other person and of society, and determines his reactions accordingly. Many years ago now, I was deeply affected. Those of you who are old enough will remember when two Royal Signals non-commissioned officers drove into an IRA funeral in West Belfast, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were pursued, and they were pulled out of their cars, and they were lynched and murdered. And it was dreadful. It was all filmed from a helicopter overhead. And I remember as a soldier at the time, not really as a Christian, I thought, hang on guys, they both had their 9mm Browning pistols. They each had 10 rounds. There should be at least 20 dead IRA people there. Why didn't they shoot? And then a few years later, I was visiting an injured soldier in Musgrave Park Hospital, and I was driving up in we call them a covert car. It's like a normal car. I had my radio, I had my pistol under my thigh, and I was briefed. I was given a map, and you're told you have to avoid the red area. Okay, the red area you do not want to go into, because that's the same area that those two Royal Signal corporals went into. And I got lost because the motorway was closed. I didn't know my way around Belfast. I'd never been to Belfast before. I'd only served in South Armagh, and I ended up driving into the heart of Republican West Belfast. And I can tell you, I was very, very scared. And I remember thinking, I've got my pistol, I've got 10 rounds. Is it 1 round for me, or is it 9 rounds for them, and then 1 round for me? Now, looking back now, as a Christian, I can see how wrong my attitude was. It was my mistake. I shouldn't have been in that area. And the last thing I should have done is to have taken out as many attackers as I could have done. I should have probably done what those Royal Signals people did, although I suspect they probably didn't have much choice in the matter. You see, that's how Jesus would have responded. He did lay down his life without taking out as many of the opposition at the same time as possible. So we've looked at what to do when you've offended somebody. We've looked at what to do when you have been offended. And as part of that, we've looked at the model that Christ sets us on the cross, which is the ultimate model of how to turn the other cheek and look for the best in other people. But the third scenario, what are we going to do if you don't like or agree or approve of what somebody else is doing? Now, I don't know how many people are like this here, but I'm sure we've all at some stage tried to pass judgment on somebody else. This is examining another person's life, making a critique of their life. And here's what Jesus has to say, and we're going to Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 to 5. You'll find that on page 919. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. What a wonderful image, what a wonderful metaphor Christ uses there. And there is, of course, a big do not at the beginning. It's do not judge. Do not cast your eyes over another person's life just for the opportunity to criticize them. Now, it's very important to understand what Jesus means by judging others. It doesn't mean that we can never make a value judgment. If somebody wanders into church reeking of alcohol and unsteady on their feet, smoking a joint, and says, I'd like to go and work in your children's group, I am going to form a value judgment, and I'm going to say, no, you are not, because I disapprove of what you are getting up to, okay? 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says we're told to test everything. In 2 Corinthians 11:4, we're told that there are those who pretend to be righteous who are evil. So of course we have to make value judgments, okay? But what Jesus is talking about is having that tendency to find fault in others, being hard on people. Somebody put it like this. This is a person who is a fault finder, who's negative and destructive towards other people, actively seeking out their failings. They put the worst possible construction of their motives, they pour cold water on their ideas, and they are ungenerous towards their mistakes. Has anyone ever met anybody like that? Yeah. So that's the idea. Don't judge, okay? Always look for the best in people. It does not mean we turn a blind eye, okay? But it does mean we're generous and gracious to others. How do you counter this tendency if that is you, okay? How do you counter this tendency? I know what I do. I am very quick to judge, for example, other drivers, okay? And sometimes, I can't believe what a dreadful driver that person is. What I do is I remind myself of all the mistakes I have made, I continue to make, and no doubt will make as I get older when I'm at the wheel of my car or on my motorbike. I just remind myself that I've had a few crashes in my time. I've had a few points on my license in my time. Okay, so don't judge others because I am just as bad myself. So remind yourself, keep yourself humble. Remind yourself that you are not infallible. You too make mistakes. Okay, so that's the way to counter that tendency. And you need to do it because finding fault in others is actually quite good fun, isn't it? It makes you feel so good about yourself. Because let's face it, that's often why we do it, so you get to feel all superior. So Jesus gives us the key. Just focus on your own sinfulness, your own ability to make mistakes and mess up. Stop focusing, on the speck in someone else's eye and deal with the plank in your own. So to conclude, this teaching is hard. There's no other way to describe it. It is hard. It's tough. And most of us here will mishandle conflict. I hope after tonight, when people do fall out, okay, we can at least know how we are to handle it biblically. Sometimes when we don't make up, we leave a service team at church. We may leave our connect group. We may even change church. We may even move house. We might even leave our marriage. It's as if our relational life has become disposable. But we can do better, and Jesus tells us how. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. And when you're behaving as if you loved someone, you will presently come to love him." In many ways, that's the principle behind the principle. James Emery White said this, "It has long been known among human behavior specialists that you do not feel your way into acting, you act your way into feeling." So act as if you love somebody and the love will come. And Jesus has laid out how to tackle those actions. It might mean you asking for forgiveness, perhaps even to someone here tonight. It might mean extending grace and forgiveness to someone who has wronged you. And it might be acknowledging the fact that you're a little too quick to look at the specks in other people's eyes when you have a socking great big timber beam sticking out of your own. But whatever it entails for you tonight, it will result in something taking place in your life which we all long for, which is relational health and authenticity. Isn't it great when we enjoy good relationships? And isn't it hell when our relationships are going down the pan? What we all want is restored relationships.